The morning light revealed what silk gloves had hidden for months. When Sebastian Darrow, Duke of Ashbourne, caught his ward's wrist as she reached for the tea service, the sleeve slipped, exposing finger-shaped bruises darkening her pale skin. His blood ran cold. Lady Eleanor Fairfax, the spirited young woman he had promised his dying friend to protect, flinched at his touch. By evening, whispers rippled through London's elite drawing rooms. By midnight, Viscount Blackwell, her fiancé, had vanished without explanation, his family's townhouse dark and abandoned. What the Duke discovered that night would shatter one engagement and forge an unexpected love that society would never forget. If you are listening to this story, do not forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has travelled. Lady Eleanor Fairfax had learned to move through Ashbourne House like a ghost, her footsteps silent on the marble floors, her presence barely disturbing the air. At 20 years old, she possessed the kind of beauty that painters immortalized. Pale golden hair that caught the light like spun silk, eyes the color of a summer sky just before dusk, and features so delicate they seemed carved from porcelain. Yet there was something extinguished in those eyes, a light that had slowly dimmed over the 6 months since her engagement to Viscount Nathaniel Blackwell. The Duke of Ashbourne's London residence stood as a testament to old wealth and older values, its cream-coloured stone facade overlooking one of Mayfair's most prestigious squares. Inside, high ceilings adorned with elaborate plasterwork echoed with the whispers of servants and the tick of countless clocks marking time Eleanor wished would move faster or perhaps stop altogether. She had been Sebastian Darrow's ward since her father's death 3 years prior. Colonel Arthur Fairfax had been the Duke's closest friend since their days at Eton, and on his deathbed he had extracted a promise: protect Eleanor, ensure her future, see her well married. Sebastian had taken that oath seriously, perhaps too seriously. When Viscount Blackwell, heir to one of England's most prominent families, had expressed interest in Eleanor, Sebastian had seen the match as providential. The Blackwells commanded respect in Parliament, owned estates across 3 counties, and moved in circles that included the Prince Regent himself. Eleanor had initially been charmed by Nathaniel's attention. He was handsome in the classical sense, with dark hair swept back from a high forehead, penetrating grey eyes, and the kind of confident bearing that came from generations of aristocratic breeding. He quoted Byron, discussed politics with authority, and danced with practiced grace. When he proposed at a glittering ball at Carlton House, with half of London society watching, Eleanor had felt like the heroine of one of the novels she secretly devoured in the library. That was before she truly knew him. The engagement period revealed facets of Nathaniel's character that his public persona carefully concealed. He was particular about her appearance, insisting she wear only certain colours that he deemed appropriate for his future viscountess. He corrected her opinions in company, often with a condescending smile that suggested she was charming but intellectually limited. He controlled whom she visited, which invitations she accepted, even which books she read from Sebastian's extensive library. But worst of all was his temper. It started with words sharp enough to draw blood, delivered in private moments when no one else could hear. He called her foolish when she expressed enthusiasm for the reform movements sweeping through England. He mocked her charity work with the orphanage near Covent Garden, suggesting it was beneath the dignity of a future viscountess. When she dared to disagree with him about the treatment of workers on his father's estates, his eyes had turned cold as winter frost. The first time he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave marks, he had immediately apologized, blaming stress over his parliamentary duties. Eleanor had wanted to believe him, had told herself that all couples face difficulties during engagement. The second time, he twisted her wrist when she refused to cancel a visit to her childhood friend in Hampshire, someone he deemed socially inferior. Again, apologies followed, gifts arrived, promises were made. By the 6th month of their engagement, Eleanor had perfected the art of concealment. Long sleeves covered the bruises on her arms. High necklines hid the marks on her shoulders where his fingers dug in during heated arguments. She wore gloves even indoors, claiming sensitivity to the cold that perpetually seemed to seep through London's grand houses. Sebastian Darrow, occupied with his duties in the House of Lords and the management of his vast estates, noticed his ward had grown quieter, more withdrawn. He attributed it to pre-wedding nerves, the natural anxiety of a young woman approaching such a significant life change. He was a man of honor and duty, but not, he would later admit to himself, a man particularly attuned to the subtle signals of distress in those around him. Eleanor spent her days in careful preparation for a future she increasingly dreaded. She sat through endless consultations about wedding arrangements, nodding agreement to decisions that felt increasingly irrelevant. The ceremony was planned for St. George's, Hanover Square, the most fashionable church in London. Her wedding dress, currently being constructed by London's premier modiste, featured Brussels lace and seed pearls that cost more than most families earned in a year. 200 guests would attend the breakfast at Blackwell House afterward. She should have felt excited, blessed, fortunate. Instead, she felt trapped. Her only refuge was the library at Ashbourne House, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves housing thousands of volumes collected over generations. Here she could lose herself in other worlds, other lives, possibilities that seemed increasingly distant from her own reality. Sebastian had never restricted her access to his collection, unlike Nathaniel, who insisted that too much reading gave women inappropriate ideas. On this particular March morning, Eleanor sat in the window seat overlooking the square, a volume of Wordsworth's poetry open but unread in her lap. Rain streaked the glass, turning the world outside into an impressionistic blur. She wore a day dress of pale blue muslin, with long sleeves that reached her wrists, despite the fire burning in the marble fireplace. Her gloves lay beside her, temporarily removed for comfort in what she believed was solitude. The door opened softly, and Sebastian entered, looking for a particular volume on estate management. At 35, the Duke cut an impressive figure. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair touched with distinguished grey at the temples, he possessed the kind of authoritative presence that made people straighten their spines when he entered a room. His eyes, a striking shade of green, were intelligent and generally kind, though they could turn steely when facing opposition in Parliament or incompetence in his household. He had not expected to find Eleanor there at such an early hour. She typically breakfasted in her room, a habit he had assumed was simple preference, but which she had actually adopted to avoid Nathaniel's increasingly frequent morning visits. "Eleanor," he said, his voice gentle, "I did not mean to disturb you." She started violently, the book tumbling from her lap as she reached instinctively to retrieve her gloves. But Sebastian, ever the gentleman, moved quickly to retrieve the fallen volume, and in doing so, came close enough to truly see her. The morning light from the window was unforgiving in its clarity. As she reached for the book, their hands met, and he caught her wrist to steady her. The sleeve of her dress slipped back several inches, revealing skin that should have been creamy and unblemished, but instead bore distinct purple and yellow bruises in the unmistakable shape of fingers. Time seemed to stop. Sebastian's grip on her wrist loosened but did not release. His eyes traveled from the bruises to her face, seeing for the first time the fear that flashed across her features before she could mask it with composed indifference. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "How did this happen?" She pulled her arm back, yanking the sleeve down with trembling fingers. "It is nothing, Your Grace. I am simply clumsy, always walking into furniture. You know how distracted I can be when reading." But Sebastian Darrow had not risen to his position of influence by accepting convenient lies. He had interrogated seasoned politicians, negotiated with foreign ambassadors, and could read deception as easily as he read Latin. The fear in her eyes, the practiced nature of her excuse, the way she instinctively pulled away from his touch, these told him everything he needed to know. "Show me your arms," he said, his voice now carrying the authority that had commanded men in battle during his brief military service. "Your Grace, I assure you." "Eleanor, show me." The tears that had been threatening for months finally spilled over. With shaking hands, she pushed back both sleeves, revealing a horrifying map of abuse. Bruises in various stages of healing covered her forearms. Some were fresh, dark purple and angry. Others had faded to sickly yellow-green. Each one told a story of violence carefully hidden beneath silk and propriety. Sebastian's face transformed. The genial guardian disappeared, replaced by something far more dangerous. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath his skin. His hands curled into fists at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly calm in the way that only truly furious men can achieve. Blackwell did this. It was not a question. Eleanor's silence was answer enough. "How long?" he demanded. "It does not matter." "How long, Eleanor?" Her voice broke. 3 months, perhaps 4. I lose track." The Duke turned away from her, his shoulders rigid with barely contained rage. He walked to the window, staring out at the rain-soaked square without seeing it. In his mind, he was already calculating, planning. His ward, the daughter of his dearest friend, the young woman he had promised to protect and cherish, had been suffering abuse right under his nose, while he congratulated himself on arranging such an advantageous match. "Why did you not tell me?" The question came out rough, with suppressed emotion. Eleanor had asked herself the same question countless times during sleepless nights. I hoped it would improve after the wedding. Nathaniel says he is under tremendous strain. His father presses him constantly about political matters. I thought if I tried harder to please him, if I became the wife he needed." "Stop." Sebastian turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, a combination of grief and fury that made him look capable of murder. "Whatever he has told you, whatever justifications he has offered, none of it excuses this. A man who raises his hand to a woman is no gentleman, regardless of his title or his family's standing." He moved toward her then, but slowly, telegraphing his intentions so she would not fear his approach. When he reached her, he took her hands gently in his own, his touch careful, respectful, everything Nathaniel's was not. "You are not marrying him," Sebastian said with absolute finality. "The engagement is broken as of this moment. I will handle Blackwell and his family. You need never see him again." Relief crashed over Eleanor like a wave, so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. She had not realized how desperately she had longed to hear exactly those words, to be rescued from a fate she had felt powerless to escape. But relief was quickly followed by fear. "The scandal, Your Grace. The shame it will bring to your house. Everyone will say I jilted him, that I am fickle and unworthy. My reputation will be destroyed." Sebastian's smile was sharp as a blade. "Let me worry about reputation. By the time I am finished, no one will question why this engagement ended. Blackwell will consider himself fortunate if he escapes with his own reputation intact." He released her hands and moved to the door, already formulating his plan. But he paused at the threshold, looking back at her with an expression that was equal parts regret and resolve. "I failed you, Eleanor. I failed Arthur. That ends today. You have my word as a gentleman, and as your guardian, you are safe now." As the door closed behind him, Eleanor sank back onto the window seat, her entire body trembling with reaction. She did not yet know that this day would mark not just the end of her nightmare, but the beginning of a transformation that would eventually lead her to genuine love. She knew only that for the first time in months she could breathe without the weight of dread pressing on her chest. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the London streets clean. By nightfall, it would wash away more than just dirt from the cobblestones. It would wash away the carefully maintained facade of Viscount Nathaniel Blackwell, exposing the rot beneath the aristocratic polish. Sebastian Darrow did not operate impulsively, even in rage. Within an hour of discovering Eleanor's injuries, he had summoned 3 men to his study. his solicitor, his oldest friend Lord Edmund Hartwell, and a Bow Street runner named John Carey, who had proved invaluable in past delicate matters requiring discretion and information. The study was a masculine space of dark wood panelling and leather furniture, the walls lined with portraits of Darrow ancestors who seemed to watch with stern approval as their descendant planned his campaign. Sebastian stood behind his massive desk, the documents John Carey had just delivered spread before him like ammunition. "You were remarkably efficient," Sebastian said to the runner, a compact man with sharp eyes and the patient demeanor of someone accustomed to observing humanity at its worst. Carey shrugged. "The staff at the Blackwell townhouse talk freely enough in the right public houses, Your Grace. Seems Viscount Blackwell has a reputation among servants for a temper and a heavy hand. 3 chambermaids have left suddenly in the past year alone. One footman mentioned seeing him strike a horse with sufficient force to draw blood. The stables master at their country seat confirms the Viscount is known for cruelty to animals." Edmund Hartwell, who had been silent until now, spoke with barely controlled fury. "Good God, Sebastian! And we almost let him marry Eleanor." "We will not compound that failure," Sebastian replied, his voice cold as winter steel. "Edmund, I need you to send word to 20 of the most influential gossips in London. Mention that you have heard concerning rumours about Blackwell's treatment of his betrothed. Express shock and dismay. Let them draw their own conclusions. By this evening, the whispers should reach critical mass." His solicitor, a thin man named Mr. Pemberton with grey hair and shrewd eyes, cleared his throat. "Your Grace, if I may suggest a more direct approach, I could draft a formal letter breaking the engagement on Lady Eleanor's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences." "No." Sebastian's tone brooked no argument. "Eleanor will not be the one breaking the engagement. That would damage her reputation irreparably. Blackwell will withdraw himself, or he will face public exposure of behavior that will destroy not just his prospects but his family's standing." "You intend to confront him directly," Edmund said. It was not a question. He had known Sebastian since they were boys at Eton, and he recognized the look in his friend's eyes. "I intend to give him a choice," Sebastian corrected. "Leave London tonight and end the engagement by letter, citing personal reasons, or I will ensure every drawing room in England knows exactly what kind of man he is." John Carey spoke up. "If I may, Your Grace, there is another matter. Viscount Blackwell dined at White's last night and consumed a significant quantity of brandy. He spoke freely about his upcoming nuptials, making several remarks about his fiancée that the gentlemen present found troubling. He suggested he would train her properly once they were wed, and that a firm hand was necessary with spirited fillies. The silence that followed was deadly. Even Pemberton, accustomed to the worst of human nature through his legal practice, looked shaken. "Who was present?" Sebastian asked quietly. Carey consulted his notes. "Lord Baxter, Sir William Thornton, the Earl of Richmond's son, Mr. Ashford, and half a dozen others." Several expressed discomfort at his remarks. Lord Baxter, in particular, seemed disturbed. "Excellent," Sebastian said, though his expression remained grim. "Edmund, when you send your messages, ensure they reach Lord Baxter first. He has 3 daughters and a strong sense of propriety. He will be eager to distance himself from any association with Blackwell." The plan came together with military precision. By early afternoon, carefully worded messages had reached key members of the ton. By tea-time, speculation buzzed through every fashionable drawing-room. By early evening, the whispers had become a roar. Nathaniel Blackwell, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering around him, arrived at Ashbourne House at 7 o'clock for what he believed would be a routine dinner with his fiancée and her guardian. He came dressed impeccably in black evening clothes, his cravat tied in the intricate mathematical style, diamond pins glittering at his collar and cuffs. He was shown not to the drawing room, as expected, but to Sebastian's study. The first hint of trouble came when he found the Duke standing behind his desk, still in his day clothes, making no effort at hospitality. The second hint came when he noticed Edmund Hartwell standing by the fireplace, his posture radiating hostility. "Blackwell," Sebastian said, his tone devoid of warmth, "we need to discuss your engagement to my ward." Nathaniel's eyebrows rose with aristocratic disdain. "Indeed, I was not aware there was anything to discuss. The wedding is in 3 weeks. All arrangements are proceeding according to schedule." "The wedding is cancelled," Sebastian said flatly. "The engagement is terminated as of this moment." For several seconds, Nathaniel simply stared, as if unable to process words that contradicted his expectations so completely. Then his face flushed dark with anger. "You cannot be serious. Eleanor is my betrothed. The announcements have been made. The church has been reserved. Guests have been invited. You have no grounds." "I have every ground," Sebastian interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "I have seen the bruises on her arms, Blackwell. The ones you put there with your fists." The color drained from Nathaniel's face, replaced by a waxy pallor. "I do not know what lies she has told you, but Eleanor is prone to dramatics. She bruises easily, like all delicate women. I have never—" "Do not compound violence with lies," Edmund interjected from his position by the fireplace. "We have testimony from your own servants about your temper. We know about the chambermaids who left your employment. We know about the comments you made at White's last night." Nathaniel's eyes darted between the two men, calculating, already searching for escape routes. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted to something between pleading and threatening. "Ashbourne, surely we can resolve this as gentlemen. Eleanor misunderstood. The pressures of the upcoming wedding, the stress of my parliamentary duties, these things create tensions in any relationship. After we are married, once she adjusts to her new role, there will be no further difficulties. I give you my word." "Your word is worthless," Sebastian said with finality. "Here is what will happen. You will leave this house immediately. Tomorrow morning, you will send a letter to Eleanor formally and apologetically ending your engagement, citing personal reasons that make you unsuitable for marriage at this time. You will then remove yourself from London society for a minimum of 6 months. If you comply with these terms, this matter ends here. And if I refuse—" Nathaniel's voice had turned ugly, showing the true face he had hidden so carefully behind aristocratic polish. "Eleanor's reputation will be destroyed. No decent man will have her after she is jilted. She will be known as the girl who drove away her fiancé. Your precious ward will become a social pariah." Sebastian moved around the desk with predatory grace, stopping mere inches from Nathaniel. Though they were of similar height, the Duke's presence made him seem to tower over the younger man. "If you refuse," Sebastian said softly, "I will ensure every member of the Ton knows exactly why this engagement ended. I will personally inform every mother with a daughter of marriageable age about your true nature. The servants who have left your employment will suddenly find themselves willing to speak publicly about your treatment of those in your power. The gentleman at White's will be encouraged to repeat your comments about training your future wife. By the time I'm finished, your family name will be synonymous with brutality and dishonor." He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. "More than that, I will call you out. I will challenge you to a duel, Blackwell, and I will make certain every person of consequence knows it is because you struck a woman under my protection. Even if you refuse the challenge, the stain on your honor will be permanent. You will be known forever as the coward who beat his defenseless fiancé." The threat of a duel hung in the air like a drawn sword. Dueling was technically illegal, but it still carried enormous social weight among the aristocracy. To be publicly challenged was devastating. To refuse a challenge was social suicide. Nathaniel's face had gone from pale to mottled red. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, violence clearly warring with self-preservation in his mind. "You overestimate your influence, Ashbourne," he hissed. "My family has connections that rival your own. My father sits in the House of Lords. We have the Prince Regent's favor. Had, Edmund corrected mildly. Past tense. The Prince Regent received a letter this afternoon detailing certain behaviors that His Royal Highness finds particularly abhorrent. I believe the phrase used was, conduct unbecoming a gentleman. His Majesty has always been rather protective of ladies. It was a lie, but a convincing one. The Prince Regent was notoriously fickle in his affections and easily swayed by gossip. Nathaniel looked between them, finally understanding that he was outmaneuvered. These men had not acted impulsively. They had built a trap with multiple escape routes blocked, giving him only one path forward. You are destroying me over a misunderstanding, he said, making one last attempt at inducing guilt. Eleanor and I could have been happy. She simply needed guidance, and I— Get out, Sebastian said, his voice like a lash. Get out of my house, get out of London, and pray I never see your face again. Because if I do, if you ever come near Eleanor or any woman under my protection, I will forget I am a gentleman and treat you as you deserve. Nathaniel Blackwell stood frozen for a moment longer, his face a mask of impotent rage and humiliation. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and strode from the study, his footsteps echoing through the marble halls of Ashbourne House. They heard the front door slam with enough force to rattle the windows. Edmund let out a long breath. He will leave London? He has no choice, Sebastian said, moving to pour brandy for both of them with hands that only slightly trembled with residual rage. His pride is wounded, but his self-preservation is stronger. By morning, he will convince himself this was his decision, that Eleanor was unworthy of him. Men like Blackwell always rewrite history to preserve their own self-regard. And Eleanor? Edmund asked, accepting the glass. How is she managing? Sebastian's expression softened fractionally. She is stronger than she knows, but she will need time to recover from this. Time and distance from London society's scrutiny. Upstairs, in her private sitting room, Eleanor had spent the evening in a state of anxious anticipation. Her lady's maid, Mrs. Davies, a kind woman who had served the Darrow family for 30 years, sat with her working on embroidery while Eleanor pretended to read. When Sebastian finally came to her rooms at 10 o'clock, Eleanor stood so quickly that her book tumbled to the floor for the second time that day. It is done, Sebastian said simply. Blackwell has left. He will send a letter tomorrow formally ending the engagement. You will never need to see him again. Eleanor swayed, and Sebastian moved quickly to support her, guiding her to a chair. Mrs. Davies discreetly brought a glass of water, then retreated to give them privacy. I thought I would feel relieved, Eleanor whispered, and I do. But I also feel afraid. The scandal, the whispers, what people will say, will be controlled and managed, Sebastian assured her. By the time society has finished hearing the carefully edited version of events, you will be seen as the innocent party who escaped an unfortunate alliance. Blackwell will be the villain, not you. He knelt beside her chair, looking up at her with an expression of such kindness and regret that tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you better. You saved me, she said, her voice breaking. When I had given up hope of saving myself, you saw me, truly saw me. I will never forget that. Sebastian took her hand gently, mindful of the bruises still visible on her skin. You will heal from this. I promise you that. And when you are ready, when you have had time to recover yourself, you will have the freedom to choose your own future. No more arranged marriages, no more duty before happiness. Your life is your own, Eleanor Fairfax. The day as he left her that night, Eleanor sat by the window watching the London streets below. Carriages passed in the darkness, their lamps creating moving pools of light. Somewhere in that city, Nathaniel Blackwell was packing his belongings, preparing to flee the scandal that would break tomorrow like a thunderstorm. But Eleanor felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a profound exhaustion and a fragile hope that perhaps, somehow, she might find a way to be happy again. By midnight, as Sebastian had promised, Nathaniel Blackwell was gone. The townhouse stood dark and empty. his family scrambling to contain the damage to their reputation. And Eleanor Fairfax, ward of the Duke of Ashbourne, slept without nightmares for the first time in 4 months. 3 days after Nathaniel's departure, London society was consumed with speculation. The abrupt end of the Fairfax-Blackwell engagement dominated every conversation at every breakfast table, in every drawing room, at every club where gentlemen gathered over cigars and port. The carefully orchestrated whispers Sebastian had initiated had grown into a torrent of gossip, much of it surprisingly sympathetic to Eleanor. Lady Pemberton, a social arbiter whose opinion carried weight among the ton, declared at a tea party attended by 30 influential women that poor Lady Eleanor had the narrowest of escapes from a most unsuitable alliance. When pressed for details, she demurely suggested that certain behaviours had come to light that made the Viscount's character questionable. Within hours, half of London had concluded Blackwell must be either a secret gambler, a philanderer, or worse. The Blackwell family's hasty departure for their country estate in Northumberland, combined with Nathaniel's complete absence from society, only fueled speculation. Their silence was interpreted as guilt. The Earl of Blackwell, Nathaniel's father, sent a stiff formal letter to Sebastian expressing regret for any misunderstanding and assuring him that the matter would not be discussed further by either party. It was as close to an admission of wrongdoing as aristocratic pride would allow. But despite Sebastian's masterful management of the scandal, Eleanor found herself unable to participate in the social whirl that characterized a London season. The thought of attending balls, soirees, and dinner parties, where she would be scrutinized, pitied, and endlessly questioned about her broken engagement filled her with dread. She had taken to spending most of her time in her rooms or the library, venturing out only for quiet walks in the private garden behind Ashbourne House. Her arms were healing, the physical bruises fading to yellow smudges that would soon disappear entirely, but the emotional wounds remained raw and tender. Sebastian noticed her withdrawal with growing concern. One morning, a week after the confrontation with Blackwell, he found her in the conservatory, sitting among his prized orchids, with a book unopened in her lap, staring at nothing. "You cannot hide forever, Eleanor," he said gently, settling into the chair beside her. "I am not hiding," she protested weakly. "I am simply recuperating." "You are retreating from life," he corrected, his tone kind but firm. "What Blackwell did to you was unconscionable, but you cannot let it define your future. You are 20 years old, intelligent, accomplished, and beautiful. The world should not shrink to the size of this house." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes reflecting a weariness that seemed far older than her years. "What future, Your Grace? I am damaged goods now. Oh, society may sympathize, but they will never forget. Every potential suitor will wonder what I did to drive Blackwell away. Every mother with a son will see me as a cautionary tale." Sebastian was quiet for a moment, considering his words carefully. Then he said something that would change the trajectory of Eleanor's life. "I have a sister," he began. "Lady Catherine Pembroke. She lives in Bath, having moved there after her husband's death 5 years ago. You have never met her because she rarely comes to London. She finds society tiresome and artificial. Catherine is perhaps the most remarkable woman I know. She defies convention at every turn, manages her own finances, and has created a life of genuine purpose and contentment." Eleanor's interest stirred despite herself. "I did not know you had a sister. Catherine and I are very close, despite the distance. I have written to her about your situation, and she has invited you to stay with her in Bath for the season. It would give you distance from London gossip, time to heal properly, and exposure to a very different kind of society. Bath attracts artists, writers, reformers, and intellectuals. Catherine moves in circles where people value ideas and character over titles and connections." The prospect of escape from London's suffocating scrutiny was immediately appealing, but Eleanor hesitated. "Would it not seem like I am fleeing in shame?" It would seem like a young lady is spending time with family after a difficult experience, Sebastian countered. I will make it known that I specifically requested Catherine to invite you, that I feel Bath's restorative waters and quieter pace will do you good. No one will question it. 2 weeks later, Eleanor found herself in a comfortable carriage travelling west toward Bath, accompanied by Mrs. Davies and a footman. As London's sprawl gave way to countryside, Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of anxiety she had not realized she was carrying. Bath revealed itself gradually as they descended into the valley. Honey-coloured Georgian architecture arranged in elegant crescents and squares, the River Avon winding through the city, and the hills rising green and gentle beyond. It was beautiful in a way that felt human-scaled and welcoming, unlike London's imposing grandeur. Lady Catherine Pembroke's townhouse on Royal Crescent proved to be as unconventional as its owner. The drawing room, instead of being a shrine to fashionable taste, was a comfortable chaos of books, musical instruments, half-finished paintings, and exotic plants. Catherine herself met Eleanor at the door rather than waiting formally in the drawing room, a breach of protocol that immediately put Eleanor at ease. At 43, Catherine Darrow Pembroke was striking rather than beautiful, with the same green eyes as her brother, but a more animated, expressive face. She wore her dark hair in a simple style rather than the elaborate arrangements favoured in London, and her dress, while well made, was chosen for comfort rather than fashion. "My dear Eleanor," she said warmly, embracing her without any of the stiff formality Eleanor had expected. "Sebastian has told me something of your ordeal, and I am both horrified by what you endured and delighted to have you here. I think you will find Bath a welcome change from London's fishbowl." Within days, Eleanor discovered that Catherine had not exaggerated. Bath society operated by different rules. While there were certainly fashionable elements, the assembly rooms hosted regular balls, the pump room remained a centre of social activity. The city also attracted a more bohemian set that London would never countenance. Catherine introduced Eleanor to her circle with casual ease. There was Mrs. Judith Hartley, a widow who had published 3 novels under a male pseudonym and was currently working on her 4th. Mr. Thomas Whitmore, a landscape painter whose work was gaining recognition in London galleries, but who preferred Bath's light and pace. Miss Sarah Brennan, who ran a school for poor children and spoke passionately about educational reform. Dr. Marcus Thorne, a physician who treated both wealthy patients and the poor without distinction. And then there was Dr. Elias Darrow. Eleanor met him at a dinner party Catherine hosted 2 weeks after her arrival. Unlike the formal dinners of London, where placement was determined by rank and conversation followed prescribed patterns, Catherine's gatherings were relaxed affairs where people sat where they pleased and discussed whatever interested them. Elias arrived late, apologizing for an emergency at the hospital where he practiced. He was a distant cousin of Sebastian and Catherine, related through a cadet branch of the family that had long ago chosen professions over managing estates. At 32, he possessed a lean, intellectual handsomeness quite different from the fashionable London type. His brown hair was perpetually slightly dishevelled, as if he had recently run his hands through it in thought. His grey eyes held both sharp intelligence and unexpected warmth. There was something fundamentally competent about him, a sense that this was a man who knew how to solve problems and help people. He was introduced to Eleanor during the fish course, taking the empty seat beside her when another guest departed early. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice pleasantly deep and carrying a trace of northern accent that suggested time spent in Yorkshire or Durham. "Catherine has spoken of you. I understand you have recently escaped London. My sympathies. I find that city increasingly unbearable despite its attractions." Eleanor, accustomed to men who dominated conversations and corrected her opinions, was startled by his genuine interest in her response. "It is, intense," she said carefully, testing the waters. "One feels constantly observed and judged." "Indeed, like living in a very elegant prison where the inmates police each other's behavior. He smiled, transforming his serious face into something quite approachable. I spent 3 years in London studying at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Excellent medical training, insufferable social expectations. I was vastly relieved to return to Bath, where one can have interesting conversations without constantly calculating one's words for social advantage. Across the table, Mrs. Hartley was passionately arguing with Mr. Whitmore about whether art should represent reality or aspire to ideals. Miss Brennan was explaining her latest curriculum innovations to an enraptured audience. Catherine caught Eleanor's eye and smiled, as if to say, "You see, this is what conversation can be." "What brought you to medicine?" Eleanor asked Elias, finding herself genuinely curious rather than merely making polite conversation. His expression grew thoughtful. "My mother died when I was 14. Childbed fever, they called it, though no one could explain what caused it or how to treat it. I watched her suffer for 3 days while physicians shook their heads and bled her, making her weaker. I decided then that medicine could and should do better. We should understand disease, not just name it. We should help patients, not just follow tradition." The passion in his voice reminded Eleanor of her own abandoned dreams. Before her engagement, she had been involved in charity work, teaching children to read, visiting the sick. Nathaniel had forbidden all of it as unsuitable. "That is admirable," she said softly, "to take personal tragedy and transform it into purpose. What about you, Lady Eleanor? Catherine mentioned you were involved in educational charities before." He stopped, clearly unsure how much he should reference. "Before my engagement," Eleanor finished for him. There was liberation in naming it directly, not dancing around the subject. "Yes, I taught reading to children at an orphanage near Covent Garden. My fiancé felt it was beneath my station." She paused, then added with quiet defiance, "He was wrong." Elias studied her with those perceptive grey eyes. "He was wrong about many things, I suspect." There was no pity in his tone, only a straightforward acknowledgement of truth. Eleanor found it refreshing beyond measure. The dinner continued until nearly midnight, with conversation ranging across politics, art, medicine, literature, and reform movements sweeping through England. Eleanor found herself contributing more than she had in months, her opinions welcomed rather than corrected, her intelligence engaged rather than dismissed as unnecessary ornamentation. As guests departed, Elias paused to speak with her privately in the entrance hall while Catherine was bidding farewell to Mrs. Hartley. "Lady Eleanor, I wonder if you might be interested in visiting the school where Miss Brennan teaches. She's always seeking educated volunteers to help with reading instruction. Catherine mentioned you had experience in that area." The offer was casual, absent any pressure or expectation. Eleanor found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. "I would like that very much." His smile was genuine and unguarded. "Excellent. Perhaps Thursday afternoon. I volunteer there weekly, teaching basic science to the older children. We could travel together if you are comfortable with that arrangement." Eleanor realized she was comfortable with it, more comfortable than she had been with any man besides Sebastian in months. There was something fundamentally safe about Elias Darrow, a quality of respect and kindness that radiated from him without effort. Thursday would be perfect. After he left, Catherine joined Eleanor in the drawing room for a final cup of tea before bed. "So," Catherine said with studied casualness, "what did you think of my cousin Elias?" Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. "He is very interesting, intelligent, kind. He is a good man," Catherine said seriously, "perhaps the best man I know without exaggeration. He has refused numerous offers from wealthy patients who wanted him as their personal physician, preferring to maintain his hospital practice where he can help those who cannot afford private care. He has no fortune beyond his medical earnings, no prospects for title or estates, and absolutely no interest in social climbing." She paused, then added gently, "Which is to say, Eleanor, that if you find yourself enjoying his company, you should trust that instinct. Elias sees people clearly. He has to in his profession, and he treats everyone with the same fundamental respect regardless of rank. He would never ever raise his hand to a woman or abuse power over someone in his care. Eleanor met Catherine's eyes and saw understanding there, recognition of fear that needed to be named and addressed directly. "I am not ready for courtship," Eleanor said quietly. "I may never be ready." "That is perfectly reasonable," Catherine assured her. "But friendship, intellectual companionship, a connection with someone who values you for your mind and character, those are always worth pursuing, with no pressure about where they might lead." As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she found herself thinking not of Nathaniel or the nightmare she had escaped, but of thoughtful grey eyes and a man who transformed personal tragedy into a calling to help others. It was not love or even attraction, not yet, perhaps not ever, but it was the first stirring of genuine interest she had felt in longer than she could remember. Outside her window, Bath spread below in gentle curves of lamplight. Somewhere in that city, Elias Darrow was likely still awake, reading medical journals or tending to a patient who needed him. The thought was oddly comforting. For the first time since her ordeal began, Eleanor Fairfax allowed herself to imagine a future that was not defined by fear or duty, but by choice and possibility. Thursday arrived with clear skies and the kind of crisp spring weather that made Bath's honey-coloured stones seem to glow. Eleanor found herself taking unusual care with her appearance, choosing a day dress of soft green muslin that Catherine had helped her select. It was simpler than her London wardrobe, more suited to practical activity than fashion, but it made her eyes appear more blue and brought colour to her cheeks. Mrs. Davies noticed her ward's unusual attention to her appearance and said nothing, but her knowing smile suggested she understood perfectly well what, or rather, who, had prompted such care. Elias arrived precisely on time, driving a modest carriage himself, rather than employing a coachman. Eleanor appreciated the practicality. It afforded them privacy for conversation without the formal distance a third presence would impose. The school occupied a converted warehouse near the river, a building that had been donated by a philanthropic merchant and transformed by Miss Brennan's vision and determination into something approaching an actual educational facility. Inside, 2 large rooms housed roughly 60 children, ranging from ages 5 to 14, divided by ability rather than age. Sarah Brennan greeted them at the door, her face flushed with perpetual motion and enthusiasm. "Lady Eleanor, how wonderful that you have come. Dr. Darrow has told me of your experience teaching reading. I have a group of 8 children, ages 7 to 9, who are struggling with basic literacy. Would you be willing to work with them?" For the next 2 hours, Eleanor forgot everything beyond the immediate task of helping young minds grasp the mysterious connection between printed symbols and spoken words. Her students were a mixture of orphans, children of the working poor, and a few whose parents had scraped together pennies for the modest fees Miss Brennan charged those who could afford to pay. They were hungry for knowledge in a way that London's pampered children never were. When Eleanor praised a boy named Thomas for correctly sounding out mother, his face lit with such joy that she felt tears prick her eyes. These children understood that literacy represented escape from poverty, opportunity for better lives. Each word they mastered was a key to unlock a future their parents could never access. Across the room, she could occasionally hear Elias explaining basic natural philosophy to older students. His voice carried clearly, animated and enthusiastic, as he described how the heart pumped blood through the body. He had brought a rabbit from his medical practice to demonstrate anatomy, and the children were utterly captivated. When the session ended, Eleanor felt more energized than exhausted. The children thanked her with earnest sincerity before rushing out to their afternoon duties, jobs in factories, help for family businesses, or simply the struggle of surviving another day. "You were marvelous," Sarah told her warmly. "Young Thomas has been resistant to every teacher's efforts, but you reached him somehow. Would you consider returning? We desperately need consistent volunteers. Eleanor found herself agreeing immediately. I would be honored. As they drove back toward Royal Crescent, Elias glanced at her with approval. You have a gift for teaching. The children responded to you immediately. They reminded me why I loved that work, Eleanor admitted. In London, my charity efforts felt performative, something young ladies did to appear virtuous, but this felt real. Those children genuinely needed what I could offer. That is the difference between genuine purpose and social obligation, Elias agreed. Most charity in London is about being seen to care, not about actually helping. You strike me as someone who prefers substance to appearance. The observation was perceptive and oddly intimate. Eleanor found herself wanting to share more than she usually would with a near stranger. My father believed education was transformative, she said. He taught me Latin, Greek, mathematics, subjects considered unnecessary for girls. He said knowledge was the one inheritance that could never be taken away, that would serve me regardless of what fate held. He sounds like a remarkable man. He was. Eleanor's voice softened with memory. His death was difficult. I became Sebastian's ward at 17, and I was grateful for his protection, but I also lost some of the freedom my father had allowed me. Sebastian is kind, but he sees the world in terms of duty and propriety. When Nathaniel proposed, Sebastian thought he was securing my future. He could not have known. She stopped abruptly, realizing she was about to reveal more than was wise. But Elias simply said, could not have known that external polish sometimes conceals internal rot. It is not your guardian's fault that Blackwell was skilled at deception. Men like that often are. The casual acknowledgement that he knew about her broken engagement and understood its true nature was startling. Eleanor had expected to spend months or years avoiding the subject, dancing around the truth with euphemisms and careful silences. Instead, here was someone who spoke plainly about difficult realities. Catherine told you, Eleanor said. It was not quite a question. She mentioned that you had escaped an unfortunate engagement to someone who proved to be unsuitable. She did not provide details, nor would I ask for them. Your past is your own business, Lady Eleanor. I am more interested in who you are now and who you might become, given freedom to choose. They rode in companionable silence for several moments before Elias added, I should mention that I am attending the Assembly Room's ball on Friday evening. Catherine has agreed to accompany me, as I find such events tedious without interesting company. If you have recovered sufficiently to face society again, we would be delighted to have you join us. The invitation was casual, absent any romantic pressure, but Eleanor recognized it for what it was. An opportunity to re-enter social life on her own terms, supported by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. I will consider it, she said, though she already knew her answer would be yes. The Assembly Room's ball proved to be a revelation. Unlike London's competitive, scrutinizing atmosphere, Bath society brought a more relaxed elegance to its entertainments. Certainly, there were fashionable elements and social hierarchies, but somehow the stakes felt lower, the judgments less harsh. Eleanor arrived with Catherine and Elias, wearing a gown of pale gold silk that Catherine's modiste had created. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, elegant without demanding attention. She had left off most jewelry, wearing only her mother's pearl earrings and a simple gold chain. She felt multiple eyes turn toward her as they entered, felt the ripple of recognition and curiosity. The story of her broken engagement had reached Bath, of course. Gossip travelled faster than any Royal Mail coach. But here, among Catherine's circle, she found sympathy rather than judgment. Mrs. Hartley immediately drew her into conversation with a young poet who was nervously preparing for his first public reading. Mr. Whitmore insisted on showing her sketches of his latest landscape work. Miss Brennan bubbled with enthusiasm about Thomas's progress with reading, and Elias remained nearby, not possessively, but protectively, a steady presence that discouraged anyone from approaching with impertinent questions or false sympathy. When the dancing began, he asked her for a waltz with such genuine courtesy that Eleanor found herself accepting before her nervousness could interfere. "I should warn you," he said as they took their positions, "I am an adequate dancer at best. Medicine requires many skills, but grace is not among them." He was being modest. While not the polished performer that London's dancing masters produced, Elias moved with natural confidence and led her smoothly through the steps. Eleanor found herself relaxing into the rhythm, enjoying the simple pleasure of music and movement without the weight of expectation or scrutiny. "You are doing very well for someone who claimed to find balls tedious," she observed. "The ball is tedious," he corrected with a smile. "The present company is decidedly not." It was the first overtly complimentary thing he had said to her, and Eleanor felt warmth rise to her cheeks. Before she could respond, the dance brought them near another couple, and Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Lord Philip Ashford, a London acquaintance who moved in the same circles as the Blackwells, was dancing with a young woman Eleanor did not recognize. His eyes widened when he saw her, surprise quickly followed by something that looked like calculation. As their paths crossed in the figure of the dance, Ashford spoke just loudly enough for Eleanor to hear. "Lady Eleanor, what a surprise to find you in Bath. I had heard you were indisposed after your unfortunate experience." The words were carefully chosen to sound solicitous, while actually being subtly cruel, reminding everyone within earshot of her scandal. Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Elias spoke with such icy politeness that several nearby dancers glanced over. "Lord Ashford, how interesting to see you so far from London. I had heard you were facing some rather significant gambling debts. I hope Bath's less expensive entertainments prove sufficient for your straitened circumstances." Ashford's face flushed dark red. The comment was devastating precisely because it was likely true. Younger sons of nobility frequently found themselves in financial difficulties. "I do not know what lies you have heard, Dr. Darrow, but I assure you—" "Oh, I make it a policy never to listen to lies," Elias interrupted smoothly, "which is why I trust the reports from several reliable sources about your recent losses at White's. But please let us not discuss such tedious matters at a ball." Lady Eleanor and I were enjoying a most pleasant dance before the interruption. He guided Eleanor away with such authority that Ashford was left standing speechless, his own partner looking at him with new wariness. Eleanor felt herself trembling, not with fear, but with a complicated mixture of emotions. "You did not have to do that." "Actually, I did," Elias replied, his voice gentle now. "Men like Ashford are bullies who disguise cruelty as social commentary. They need to understand that you have protectors who will not tolerate such behavior. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "the information about his gambling was entirely accurate. He's nearly bankrupt, which is probably why he is in Bath rather than participating in the London season." "How do you know that?" "I play cards occasionally with a solicitor who is involved in settling Ashford's debts. Medical men and legal men share information freely. We both deal in confidences and consequences." The waltz ended, and Elias escorted Eleanor to where Catherine waited with glasses of lemonade. His cousin took one look at Eleanor's face and immediately understood something had occurred. "Lord Ashford," Elias explained succinctly. "He attempted to remind Lady Eleanor of her scandal. I reminded him of his own troubles." Catherine's expression hardened. "Philip Ashford is a parasite who survives by making others feel small. Good for you, Elias. Eleanor, you must not let him distress you." "I am not distressed," Eleanor said slowly, realizing with surprise that it was true. "I am angry, and that feels considerably better than frightened or ashamed." "Anger can be quite useful," Catherine agreed. "Properly directed, it becomes fuel for change. My late husband taught me that. He was furious about social injustice, and he transformed that fury into political action that actually helped people." The evening continued, but Eleanor found herself energized rather than drained by the encounter with Ashford. She danced several more times, once with Mr. Whitmore, who apologized profusely for stepping on her foot, and once with a young officer who was charming but intellectually vapid. But it was Elias she kept noticing across the room. Elias, whose conversation seemed most interesting. Elias, whose presence made her feel simultaneously safe and challenged. As the ball concluded and they prepared to depart, Lord Ashford made the mistake of approaching their group, apparently intent on salvaging something from his earlier humiliation. "Doctor Darrow," he said with forced joviality, "I hope there are no hard feelings about our earlier misunderstanding. Perhaps we might discuss the matter over drinks." Elias regarded him with the kind of clinical detachment he probably used when examining particularly unpleasant specimens. "Lord Ashford, I think you mistake me for someone who values your good opinion. I do not. What I value is the well-being of people under my protection and in my circle of care. You attempted to harm someone I care about, using her past vulnerability as a weapon. That is unforgivable." He paused, then added with devastating politeness, "I suggest you return to London and address your financial difficulties, rather than attempting to restore your reputation at the expense of others. Good evening." The dismissal was absolute. Ashford retreated with what dignity he could muster, but the damage to his standing in Bath society was considerable. By the next morning, half the city would know he had been publicly put in his place by a physician who valued character over rank. In the carriage returning to Royal Crescent, Catherine squeezed Eleanor's hand. "You are beginning to see, I think, what it means to have genuine allies rather than social acquaintances. People who defend you, not because it benefits them, but because they believe it is right." Eleanor looked at Elias, who was gazing out the window with apparent distraction, though she suspected he was quite aware of her regard. "Yes," she said softly, "I am beginning to see that very clearly." What she did not yet fully understand was that she was also beginning to see the possibility of a different kind of future than she had imagined, one where she was valued for her intelligence and character, where she could pursue meaningful work, and where love, if it came at all, would be based on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than social convenience and duty. But that understanding would come as spring deepened into summer and her acquaintance with Dr. Elias Darrow evolved into something neither of them had quite anticipated, but both were ready to explore. Summer arrived in Bath with gentle warmth, turning the city's parks verdant and filling window boxes with cascading flowers. Eleanor had been in Catherine's household for 3 months now, and the transformation in her was visible to everyone who knew her. The perpetual wariness that had shadowed her eyes in London had faded, replaced by a growing confidence. She had become a regular volunteer at Miss Brennan's school, teaching reading 3 days each week. Her students adored her, and she found in their progress a satisfaction that London society balls had never provided. More significantly, her friendship with Elias had deepened into something that both excited and terrified her. They spent considerable time together, but always in appropriate contexts, teaching at the school, walking in Sydney Gardens with Catherine as chaperone, attending lectures at the Philosophical Society, visiting patients in the hospital where Elias practiced. Their conversations ranged across every imaginable topic, from medical ethics to political reform, from literature to natural philosophy. What Eleanor found most extraordinary was how Elias listened to her opinions with genuine interest, treating her ideas as worthy of consideration and debate. When they disagreed, which was frequent, he argued with intellectual rigor rather than condescending dismissal. He took her seriously as a thinking person, not merely a decorative female presence. "You have remarkable insights about education reform," he told her one afternoon as they walked through Victoria Park after a session at the school. "Have you considered writing them down? There are journals that publish essays on such topics." Eleanor laughed at the absurdity. "No respectable publication would print work by a woman, especially one with my history." "Then publish under a pseudonym, as Mrs. Hartley does," Elias suggested practically. Your ideas deserve a wider audience than our small circle. You have thought deeply about how to teach children from poverty in ways that actually reach them. That knowledge could help teachers across England. The fact that he believed she had knowledge worth sharing, that her experiences and observations mattered beyond her immediate context, planted a seed that would eventually flower into Eleanor's first published work on educational methodology. But as their intellectual connection intensified, so did something less definable, an emotional current that ran beneath their conversations, expressed in glances that lingered a moment too long, hands that brushed accidentally with increasing frequency, silences that felt charged with unspoken possibility. Catherine noticed, of course. She noticed everything. "Elias is in love with you," she told Eleanor one evening, as they prepared for bed after a dinner party where Elias's attention to Eleanor had been particularly evident. "He has been for weeks, though he is far too honourable to say so while he believes you are still recovering from Blackwell's abuse." Eleanor's hands stilled on her hairbrush. "I am not ready for love. I may never be ready." "That is fear speaking, not truth," Catherine said gently but firmly. "You are conflating love with control, kindness with manipulation, because Blackwell taught you that the two are inseparable, but they are not. Elias would never try to control you, Eleanor. He wants to partner with you, not possess you. How can you be certain?" The question came out raw, revealing the depth of Eleanor's anxiety. Catherine sat beside her, taking her hand. "Because I have known Elias since he was born. I have watched him with patients who are terrified, with children who are suffering, with colleagues who challenge him. He has never once used his power or knowledge as a weapon. His instinct is always to empower others, to help them find their own strength. That is who he is, at his core." Eleanor wanted desperately to believe it, but trust felt like an impossible leap across a chasm. The crisis came in July, on what should have been a peaceful afternoon. Eleanor was working in Catherine's garden, sketching medicinal plants for a project Elias was developing to help patients identify herbal remedies. The work required careful attention to botanical detail, and she was absorbed in rendering the delicate structure of a fever-few blossom. A shadow fell across her sketchbook. Eleanor looked up to find a man standing before her, blocking the sunlight. For a disorienting moment, her heart seized with terror, convinced somehow that Nathaniel had found her. But it was not Nathaniel. It was his younger brother, Mr. Charles Blackwell, whom Eleanor had met only twice during her engagement. Charles had his brother's dark hair and grey eyes, but lacked Nathaniel's polished charm. He looked uncomfortable, almost apologetic, as he removed his hat. "Lady Eleanor, forgive me for approaching you without warning. Your maid said I might find you here." Eleanor stood, her sketch forgotten, every muscle tense with readiness to flee. "Mr. Blackwell, this is unexpected." "I am in Bath taking the waters for my health," Charles said quickly, as if to explain his presence. "I did not know you were here until I saw you at the pump room yesterday. I needed to speak with you." "I have nothing to say to your family," Eleanor said, her voice colder than she had known she was capable of. "If Nathaniel has sent you—" "Nathaniel knows nothing of this visit," Charles interrupted. "He is still at our country estate, and Father has forbidden mention of your name in the house. I came because I owe you an apology, and because you deserve to know certain truths." Despite her instinct to dismiss him, Eleanor found herself curious. "What truths?" Charles glanced around the garden, then said quietly, "May we sit? This is difficult for me to say." Against her better judgment, Eleanor gestured to the garden bench. She remained standing, keeping distance between them, but she listened. "I knew what Nathaniel was," Charles said, his voice heavy with shame. "I had seen his cruelty to animals, to servants, even to me when we were children and he was angry. Our father dismissed it as high spirits, as the natural dominance of a firstborn son. Our mother made excuses, but I knew." He looked up at Eleanor, and she saw genuine anguish in his face. "When he became engaged to you, I thought perhaps marriage would civilize him, that your gentleness would moderate his temper. I told myself it was not my place to interfere, but after you broke the engagement, after the Duke made clear why it ended, I realized my silence made me complicit in what happened to you. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor asked, still wary but softening slightly. Because you deserve to know that what happened was not your fault. Nathaniel's behavior had nothing to do with anything you did or failed to do. He is cruel by nature, and he would have become worse after marriage, not better. The Duke of Ashbourne saved you from a terrible fate, and you were brave to reveal the truth. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes, not from sadness but from relief. The small part of her that still wondered if she had somehow provoked Nathaniel's violence, if she had been too spirited or too dull or too something, felt that doubt dissolve. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You cannot know how much I needed to hear that." Charles stood, preparing to depart. "I have one more thing to tell you, though it brings me shame to admit it. Nathaniel is not well regarded in our county. 3 families have dismissed him from their homes after incidents at house parties. He is developing a reputation. Father keeps it quiet through influence and money, but eventually such things become impossible to hide. You were fortunate to escape when you did." After he left, Eleanor remained in the garden for a long time, processing the conversation. She was still there when Elias arrived for a planned visit, found her by inquiring with Mrs. Davies, and approached with immediate concern upon seeing her distressed expression. "Eleanor, what has happened?" She told him about Charles Blackwell's visit, about the apology and the revelation that Nathaniel's violence was worsening. As she spoke, Elias's face darkened with anger, though she instinctively knew the anger was not directed at her. "That man came here to Catherine's home and approached you alone," he demanded. "Even with good intentions, that was unacceptably intrusive. You could have been terrified." "I was, initially," Eleanor admitted. "But then I was grateful. He released me from doubts I did not even realize I still carried." Elias moved closer, though he maintained careful distance. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. What Blackwell did to you had nothing to do with any failing on your part. Violent men choose their targets not because the target is flawed, but because they perceive vulnerability they can exploit. It is entirely about power and control." "I know that intellectually," Eleanor said. "But emotionally, there was still a small voice asking what I could have done differently." "Nothing," Elias said with absolute certainty. "You could have done nothing differently that would have changed his nature. The only difference would have been whether he revealed his violence before or after the wedding." They sat together on the bench, not touching but close enough that Eleanor could feel the warmth of his presence. The summer afternoon was golden around them, bees humming among the roses, birds calling from the trees. "Elias," Eleanor said slowly, testing words she had been thinking for weeks, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest." "Always," he promised. "Why do you spend so much time with me? I am damaged, scandalous, fearful of intimacy. Surely there are women in Bath who would be far less complicated companions." Elias turned to face her fully, his grey eyes serious and utterly sincere. "You are the least complicated woman I have ever met, Eleanor. You say what you mean. You think deeply about ideas that matter. You do genuine good in the world rather than performing charity for social credit. You are brave and intelligent and kind. That you have survived trauma does not make you damaged. It makes you resilient." He paused, then added with characteristic directness, "I spend time with you because you are the most interesting person in Bath, possibly in all of England. Because conversations with you challenge me to think more clearly and feel more deeply. Because working alongside you at the school reminds me why I chose medicine, to help people, to make tangible differences in individual lives. And yes, because I have fallen quite thoroughly in love with you, though I had not intended to say so quite yet." Eleanor's breath caught. The declaration was so honest, so devoid of manipulation or expectation, that it disarmed all her defenses. "I am not certain I know how to be loved," she whispered. "Nathaniel said he loved me, and then he hurt me. How do I trust that your love will be different?" "By letting me prove it over time," Elias said simply. "I am not asking you to trust me immediately, Eleanor. I am asking you to give me the opportunity to demonstrate through consistent action that I mean what I say, that I value your autonomy, respect your boundaries, and want your happiness above my own satisfaction." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention clearly, and took her hand only when she did not pull away. "I am also asking if you might consider a future in which you are not defined by what was done to you, but by choices you make freely. A future in which you continue your educational work, write your essays, pursue your interests, with a partner who supports those pursuits rather than constraining them." Eleanor looked at their joined hands, at the care with which he held her, neither too tight nor too tentative. She thought about the past 3 months, about how Elias had been unfailingly respectful, consistently supportive, genuinely interested in her thoughts and welfare. "I think," she said slowly, "that I might like to explore that possibility. Not immediately. I still need time, but someday, perhaps sooner than I expected, I might be ready to risk love again." "Someday works perfectly," Elias assured her, his smile transforming his serious face. "I am a patient man, Eleanor. I can wait for someday." As summer deepened and Eleanor's heart gradually opened to possibility, news arrived from London that would force her to confront her past more directly. Sebastian wrote to inform her that Lord and Lady Rothwell were hosting a significant ball in late August, and he specifically requested that Eleanor attend with him. Half of London society would be present, including many who had witnessed her humiliation months earlier. It would be her opportunity to reclaim her standing, to demonstrate that she had not been destroyed by scandal, but had instead emerged stronger. Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of returning to London, of facing people who had witnessed her broken engagement, filled her with anxiety. But Catherine and Elias both encouraged her to consider it carefully. "Running forever is not healing," Catherine advised. "Eventually, you must face your past and show yourself, that it no longer has power over you." "I will accompany you," Elias offered, "if you wish it, as your friend, your supporter, and if you are comfortable with it, your acknowledged suitor." The word suitor should have frightened Eleanor. Instead, she found it caused a flutter of something that felt remarkably like anticipation. "Would you truly come to London for a ball?" she asked. "You despise such events." "I would walk through fire for you, Eleanor," Elias said matter-of-factly. "A tedious ball seems relatively minor by comparison." 3 weeks later, Eleanor found herself in a carriage travelling toward London, accompanied by Catherine and Elias. In her trunk was a new ball gown that Catherine's modiste had created, a stunning dress of midnight blue silk that made Eleanor's eyes appear luminous and her skin glow like pearls. She was nervous, but also determined. She had survived Nathaniel Blackwell. She had rebuilt her confidence and found meaningful purpose. She had begun to imagine a future that included love without fear. She would not let London society intimidate her back into smallness. The ball would prove to be a triumph beyond anything she anticipated, but also a confrontation that would finally close the door on her past and open another toward an unexpected future. The Rothwell ball was everything Eleanor remembered about London society: glittering, excessive, and performative. The ballroom blazed with thousands of candles reflected in enormous gilt mirrors, creating an almost surreal brightness. Ladies wore their finest jewels and most elaborate gowns, competing silently for notice and precedence. Gentlemen in formal black created a somber backdrop for the peacock display of female fashion. Eleanor entered on Sebastian's arm, with Catherine and Elias following closely. She had expected to feel small and vulnerable returning to this world, but instead she felt oddly detached, as if observing a theatrical performance rather than participating in real life. Bath had changed her perspective. What had once seemed vitally important now appeared somewhat absurd. Sebastian, magnificent in formal evening attire, leaned close to whisper, "You look absolutely stunning, my dear. And more importantly, you look happy. That is the best revenge on Blackwell one could imagine." He was right. Eleanor did look stunning. The midnight blue gown fit her perfectly, the silk catching light with every movement. Catherine had styled her hair in an elegant but unconventional arrangement that was artful rather than fussy. She wore her mother's sapphire necklace, the only significant jewelry she owned, and it provided exactly the right touch of elegance. But more than her appearance, it was Eleanor's bearing that drew attention. She moved through the ballroom with confidence, her posture no longer defensive or diminished. When people stared, and many did, she met their gazes directly rather than looking away in shame. The whispers started immediately, of course. Eleanor could see heads turning, fans rising to conceal gossiping mouths, eyebrows raising in speculation. But Sebastian had been thorough in his campaign months earlier. The prevailing narrative painted Eleanor as the innocent party who had escaped an unfortunate alliance. Lord Baxter, one of the most respected peers in England, made a point of greeting Eleanor warmly and introducing her to his wife and 3 daughters. "Lady Eleanor, how delightful to see you looking so well. Bath has clearly agreed with you. My daughters have been eager to meet the young lady who volunteers at charity schools. They wish to undertake similar work and hoped you might advise them." It was a public endorsement that could not be ignored. Other families quickly followed suit, approaching Eleanor with carefully calibrated friendliness that acknowledged her past difficulties while welcoming her back to society. Elias remained near her, but not possessively so, his presence supportive without being intrusive. Eleanor noticed multiple mothers assessing him with interest. A successful physician from a good family connected to the Duke of Ashbourne, unmarried and clearly attentive to a beautiful young woman. He would be considered quite a catch for daughters less scandalous than Eleanor. When the dancing began, Sebastian claimed the first dance with Eleanor, a waltz that allowed him to speak privately. "I am proud of you," he told her seriously. "The courage it took to return here, to face people who know your history, that speaks to remarkable strength of character." "I had help," Eleanor said, glancing toward where Catherine and Elias stood conversing with Mrs. Hartley, who had travelled from Bath specifically for this event. "I had people who saw me as something more than a scandal to be managed." "Speaking of which," Sebastian said carefully, "Dr. Darrow seems quite devoted. Should I anticipate a conversation with him in the near future about his intentions?" Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Perhaps. Eventually. We are taking our time." "Good," Sebastian approved. "He is an excellent man, though he lacks fortune or title. If you choose him, Eleanor, you will be choosing a life of meaning over a life of luxury. I want you to understand that clearly." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor assured him, "and I would choose meaning every time. I have learned what happens when one chooses based on social advantage rather than character." The dance ended, and immediately several gentlemen approached requesting the honor of her company for subsequent dances. Eleanor accepted selectively, dancing with Lord Baxter's eldest son, with Edmund Hartwell, and eventually with Elias, who navigated the waltz with the same competent grace he brought to everything. "You are the center of attention," Elias observed, not bothering to hide his amusement. "Half the men here are desperate to dance with the beautiful, mysterious Lady Eleanor, who vanished to Bath and returned transformed." "They are curious about the scandal," Eleanor corrected. "It is voyeurism, not genuine interest." "Perhaps for some," Elias conceded, "but others are genuinely impressed by your recovery and your work with charity education. Lord Baxter was quite sincere in his admiration. His daughters truly do wish to learn from your experience." As they turned through the waltz, Eleanor caught sight of a familiar figure across the ballroom, Lord Philip Ashford, the man who had tried to humiliate her at the Bath Assembly. He was staring at her with an expression of shocked disbelief, clearly not having expected to see her return to London society so triumphantly. "Your enemy from Bath is here," Eleanor murmured to Elias. "I noticed," Elias replied calmly. "He has been glaring in our direction for the past 20 minutes. I believe he is struggling to accept that the woman he tried to diminish is currently the most discussed person at London's most prestigious ball." Elias was right. Eleanor could hear fragments of conversation as they danced past other couples, looking absolutely radiant. "Heard she does remarkable charity work. That physician seems quite devoted. Ashbourne clearly dotes on her." The vindication should have felt sweet, but instead, Eleanor found she did not care particularly what London society thought. Their approval or disapproval no longer had power over her sense of self-worth. What mattered was the weight of Elias's hand at her waist, the intelligence in his grey eyes, the future they might build together based on partnership and purpose rather than social climbing and appearances. The confrontation she had half expected came not from Ashford, but from an unexpected source. During a break in the dancing, as Eleanor was accepting a glass of champagne from a footman, she found herself face to face with Lady Margaret Blackwell, Nathaniel's mother. Lady Blackwell was an imposing woman of 50, dressed in dark purple silk that matched her icy demeanour. Her face was carefully composed, but Eleanor could see tension in the tightness around her mouth, the calculation in her eyes. "Lady Eleanor," she said, her voice carrying clearly enough to draw attention from those nearby. "I see you have recovered from your disappointment." The word choice was deliberate, designed to suggest Eleanor had been the one disappointed rather than the one who escaped abuse. Eleanor felt Elias materialize beside her, a silent but solid presence. She also saw Sebastian moving in their direction, his expression alert for trouble. But Eleanor did not need rescuing. She had found her voice in Bath, and she would use it now. "Lady Blackwell," she replied with perfect composure, "how unexpected to see you in London. I had heard your family was avoiding society this season." It was a direct hit. The Blackwell family had indeed maintained a low profile since the broken engagement, their absence noted and interpreted as shame. Lady Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "My family has nothing to be ashamed of. We are victims of malicious gossip and ungrateful behavior. You broke faith with my son, Lady Eleanor, and you damaged his reputation with lies about his character." The accusation hung in the air. Around them, conversations stopped as people turned to watch the confrontation. Eleanor could have retreated, could have offered some placating response that would smooth over the tension. 6 months ago, she would have done exactly that. Instead, she said clearly, "Your son is a violent man who uses his fists to control women he believes are his property. I did not lie about his character, I revealed it, and I am profoundly grateful to my guardian for protecting me from a marriage that would have destroyed me." Lady Blackwell's face flushed dark with rage. "How dare you slander my son in public? Lord Ashbourne, surely you will not allow your ward to spread such vicious lies." Sebastian stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his position. "They are not lies, Lady Blackwell. I personally witnessed evidence of your son's violence toward Lady Eleanor. I personally confronted him about his behavior. And I personally ensured that he would face consequences if he ever approached another woman with violent intent." He paused, then added with devastating calm, "If you wish to discuss this matter further, I am happy to provide specific details in front of everyone present. However, I suspect such disclosure would not serve your family's interests." The threat was clear. Push this confrontation, and Sebastian would expose Nathaniel's abuse publicly and completely. Lady Blackwell's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. She looked around at the assembled crowd, dozens of society's most influential members, all watching, all listening, all forming judgments that would spread through London within hours. "This matter is not concluded," she finally managed, though her voice lacked conviction. "On the contrary, Elias interjected, speaking for the first time. "It is entirely concluded. Lady Eleanor has moved forward with her life. She is thriving in her new circumstances, and she has no desire to revisit past traumas. I suggest, Lady Blackwell, that your family do the same. Focus on addressing your son's character defects rather than blaming the woman who wisely escaped his abuse." The clinical detachment in his voice, the physician's calm assessment of pathology, somehow made his words even more damning than Sebastian's aristocratic authority. Lady Blackwell turned and swept from the ballroom, her exit more of a retreat than a dignified departure. In the silence that followed, Eleanor realized she was trembling, not with fear, but with the adrenaline of having finally, completely, stood up for herself in front of the society that had once terrified her. Then Lady Rothwell herself, their hostess, approached with a warm smile. "Lady Eleanor, how absolutely brilliant! I have been longing for someone to put Margaret Blackwell in her place for years. She is insufferably proud of that awful son. Come, let me introduce you to some people who will appreciate your courage and your candor." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, conversations, and dances. Eleanor found herself at the center of a new kind of attention, genuine respect from people who valued strength over submission, honesty over social pretense. Lord Baxter's daughters indeed sought her advice about educational charity work. Mrs. Hartley introduced her to a publisher interested in essays on social reform. Edmund Hartwell's wife, Lady Hartwell, invited Eleanor to join a ladies' committee focused on improving conditions for working women in London. By evening's end, Eleanor had received 3 invitations to country house parties, 2 requests to consult on educational initiatives, and 1 very serious offer of funding if she wanted to establish her own school for poor children. But most significantly, she had received a proposal. It came not during the ball, but afterward, in the quiet of Ashbourne House's garden, where Eleanor had gone to catch her breath from the overwhelming evening. Elias had followed her, as she had known he would. "That was quite a performance," he said, settling beside her on a stone bench, surrounded by roses. "Lady Blackwell will think twice before confronting you again." "I cannot believe I said those things publicly," Eleanor admitted, though she felt no regret. 6 months ago, I would have fainted at the thought of such a scene. 6 months ago, you were trapped in fear, Elias replied. Tonight, you were free. There is a significant difference. They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, the sounds of the city muted by distance and darkness. Moonlight silvered the garden, turning ordinary flowers into something almost magical. "Eleanor," Elias said finally, his voice serious in a way that made her heart accelerate. "I had planned to wait longer, to give you more time, but after watching you tonight, watching you reclaim your power and speak your truth, I realized that you're not waiting to heal before living. You are healing through living, and I would very much like to live alongside you if you will have me." He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I am not a wealthy man, and I never will be. I am a physician, and my income is modest. I have no title, no estates, no social position beyond my family connection to Ashbourne. What I can offer you is a partnership based on respect and shared purpose. I will never seek to control you or limit your activities. I will support your educational work, your writing, whatever brings you fulfillment. I will protect you from harm while also trusting you to protect yourself. And I will love you, Eleanor, with absolute devotion for as long as you will allow me." He paused, then asked the question that would determine both their futures. "Will you marry me?" Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him. At the intelligence and kindness in his grey eyes, the strength of his character written in every line of his face, the steadiness of his hands holding hers. She thought about the past 3 months in Bath, about teaching alongside him at the school, walking through parks deep in conversation, laughing at his dry observations about society's absurdities. She thought about the future he was offering, not luxury or social prestige, but meaning and partnership, and the freedom to be fully herself. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." His smile was incandescent. He raised her hands to his lips, kissing them gently, reverently, as if she were something precious to be cherished rather than possessed. "I promise," he said solemnly, "that I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice." "You already have," Eleanor assured him. They returned to the house to find Sebastian, Catherine, and Edmund still awake in the drawing room, sharing a nightcap and discussing the evening's dramatic confrontation. "Your Grace," Elias said formally to Sebastian, "I need to speak with you about a matter of some importance." Sebastian's eyebrows rose, but his expression was knowing. "I suspected this conversation was imminent. Shall we use my study?" "That will not be necessary," Elias replied. "I prefer to be direct. I have asked Lady Eleanor to marry me, and she has accepted. I am seeking your blessing as her guardian." The room fell silent. Then Catherine let out a delighted laugh, Edmund grinned broadly, and Sebastian rose to clasp Elias's hand. "You have my blessing and my complete approval," Sebastian said warmly. "I cannot think of a man I would rather see Eleanor marry. You will take good care of her, Elias." "I will spend my life trying to deserve her," Elias promised. Catherine embraced Eleanor tightly. "I knew from the beginning that you two were perfect for each other. You have the same values, the same commitment to making the world better, rather than simply occupying space in it gracefully." The engagement was announced in the Times 2 days later. The notice was modest compared to Eleanor's previous engagement, but the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Society approved the match between the Duke of Ashbourne's ward and his respectable, if untitled, cousin. Some called it a love match. Others suggested it was sensible, given Eleanor's compromised circumstances, but none could fault the obvious devotion between the couple. The wedding took place 6 weeks later in Bath, not in London. It was a small ceremony at Bath Abbey, attended by close friends and family rather than hundreds of social acquaintances. Eleanor wore a simple gown of ivory silk rather than the elaborate confection that had been prepared for her aborted wedding to Nathaniel. She carried wildflowers instead of hothouse roses. Sebastian gave her away with visible emotion. Catherine served as matron of honor. Edmund stood up with Elias. Miss Brennan and several of Eleanor's students from the school attended, along with Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Whitmore, and the small circle of intellectuals and reformers who had welcomed Eleanor into their community. It was everything Eleanor's first engagement had not been. Genuine, intimate, focused on commitment rather than display. When Elias said his vows, his voice was steady, and his eyes never left Eleanor's face. When Eleanor promised to love and cherish him, she meant every word with a certainty that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. They settled in Bath rather than London, in a comfortable townhouse near the river. It was modest compared to Ashbourne House or even Catherine's residence, but it was theirs. Filled with medical texts and novels, watercolors and sheet music, everything that made a house a home. Elias continued his hospital practice, treating both wealthy patients who paid well and poor patients who paid nothing. Eleanor expanded her educational work, establishing a teacher training program based on the methods she had developed. She also began writing essays on education reform, publishing under a male pseudonym that fooled no one who knew her, but allowed her work to be judged on its merits. 6 months after their wedding, on a crisp December morning, Eleanor sat in their small study writing a letter to Sebastian. Elias was at the hospital, treating a difficult case that required his specialized knowledge. Outside their window, Bath looked like a watercolor painting, all soft grey and honey gold stone. She paused in her writing, reflecting on the year that had transformed her life so completely. 12 months earlier, she had been trapped in an engagement to a violent man, believing she had no choice, no voice, no future beyond duty and suffering. Now she was married to a man who valued her mind as much as her beauty, who supported her work rather than constraining it, who treated her as an equal partner rather than decorative property. She was doing meaningful work that actually helped children escape poverty through education. She was writing essays that reached thousands of readers and influenced educational policy discussions. She was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way she had never imagined possible. The front door opened, and she heard Elias's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the study doorway, his medical bag in one hand, his hair disheveled from the wind, his face tired but smiling. "How was your morning?" he asked, moving to kiss her forehead before settling into the chair beside her desk. "Productive," Eleanor replied, gesturing to the pages of her essay. "I finished the piece on teaching literacy through practical application rather than rote memorization. Mrs. Hartley thinks her publisher will be interested." "Brilliant," Elias approved. "Your insights on education deserve the widest possible audience." They sat together in companionable silence for a moment, simply enjoying each other's presence. Then Elias said casually, "I received an interesting letter today. The Royal College of Physicians has invited me to present my research on fever treatment at their annual conference. It would mean traveling to London for a week." "That is wonderful," Eleanor exclaimed. "Your work deserves recognition." "The invitation includes accommodations for my wife," Elias continued, watching her carefully. "I would very much like you to accompany me, but I know London holds difficult memories. I will not press if you would rather remain here." Eleanor considered the offer. London, which had once represented everything she feared, scrutiny, judgment, the possibility of encountering Nathaniel, now seemed merely a city. Its power over her had dissolved. "I will come with you," she decided. "I would like to visit Sebastian and Catherine, and I promised Lord Baxter's daughters I would consult on their educational charity project. Besides," she added with a smile, "I want to watch you receive the recognition you deserve. Someone should be there to feel insufferably proud of your accomplishments." Elias's expression softened with love. "Have I mentioned recently that marrying you was the best decision of my life?" "Not since this morning," Eleanor teased. "I was beginning to worry you had forgotten." He laughed, the sound filling their small study with warmth. Outside, Bath went about its business, people taking the waters, artists painting landscapes, students attending lectures, reformers planning changes to improve society. And inside their modest townhouse, Dr. Elias Darrow and his wife Eleanor had built exactly the life they wanted. A life of purpose and partnership, love and respect, meaningful work and genuine happiness. Eleanor had bloomed not by staying in the golden cage London society offered, but by choosing her own soil, her own light, her own conditions for growth. She had taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into the catalyst for finding her truest self and her greatest love. As she returned to her writing, Elias reading medical journals beside her, Eleanor Fairfax Darrow understood with perfect clarity that she had not just survived her ordeal, she had transcended it, using pain as fuel for transformation, fear as motivation for courage, and limitation as inspiration for freedom. She had found not just love, but herself, and that, she reflected, was the greatest victory of all. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling me what you thought about Eleanor and Elias's journey. Your support helps me bring more stories like this to listeners around the world.